Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. It's good to have you with us today. Election fever gripping Canada right now. Election coming up on April 28th, of course. Didn't forget about that, did you? It dominates the news. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a couple of people that have responded to some of our past podcasts. One lady very despondent about the fact that she says, just inundated with negative information and negativity and misinformation to do with candidates. You'll see a story and you'll get the bones about it, the bare bones about it, and then somebody will write something totally contrary to that in spite of the fact that there seems to be strong evidence, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, it's depressing. And I said, well, you know what? Turn it off, okay? Because it's only going to be more depressing. Get your news when you can, but don't let it wash over you 24 hours of the day. I don't think even the politicians do that. Sometimes you just have to kind of turn it off and go watch a movie or something just to get your mind off this. Stay politically attuned and stay informed, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of stuff tossed at you right now, and we're seeing that now. And some folks have asked me to comment about some of the other things that seem to be secondary issues that could become major issues. For instance, as we do this podcast, the latest count right now is there have been 3 local candidates, 1 Liberal and 2 Conservatives, that have been forced to drop out of the race. And, does that reflect on the party? Yes and no. This happens if you've been following elections. It's just about every federal election and provincial election for that matter, too. What are the reasons for it? Well, frankly, I think one of the main reasons is I don't think the political parties do a very good job of vetting local candidates. For one reason or another, maybe it's too time consuming. Maybe they just, they just look at the way that these things are developed. The local riding associations like to have more authority to do that. So maybe the federal body doesn't have as much say in these sort of candidates. And even the way they're selected, more often than not, it's, who sells the most memberships? In other words, it's a fundraising endeavor. And whoever sells the most memberships invariably becomes the candidate. Whether they're the most qualified or not seems secondary to the fact that they raise some money for the riding association. So there's a whole lot going on here. The other element to this, too, is and I know it's embarrassing for the leaders of parties when these sorts of things happen, but local candidates tend to want to shoot their mouths off and start to think that the story is all about them. They're not about them. It's about the party. It's about the leaders. Yeah, you want to get elected in your own particular riding, but your job is to simply state the party line. These are the talking points. And as soon as you start shooting your mouth off about other things, and some outrageous things too, the Liberal candidate dropping out because of some rather untoward comments that he made about his opponent. One of the Conservative candidates dropping out because he suggested that Justin Trudeau should be executed. I mean, this is insane. Whether or not you love Trudeau or hate Trudeau, that sort of talk during an election campaign, is incendiary, and it's going to reflect badly on your political party. So shut up and just do your job as a candidate and try to get your party elected. A lot of candidates just don't seem to get that message. And with that, as I mentioned a second ago, comes the misinformation that can be so very frustrating and the way that people will try to fashion the news. And we've seen this happen now. I mean, we're still relatively early into the campaign, but there's some significant trends that are developing here. The latest Nanos poll seems to indicate about a 7 to 8 point lead for the Liberals nationally. And again, as we've talked about, that's a snapshot in time. The election is on the 28th of this month. It's not today. And those numbers could get better. They could get worse. Who knows what's going to happen? There oftentimes are some things that nobody even saw coming that can have a major influence. But I got to get into that in just a second because it's a mindset of the public and the mindset of the voters that I think is really going to be a deciding factor in this. And you're getting some reaction from some people and some media outlets, frankly. Let's face it, the punditry that's going on, especially on social media, where there don't seem to be any boundaries sometimes. A lot of the pundits, the podcasters and others can pretty much say and accuse whoever of whatever and get away with it. And it's up to us as the people who are listening and watching that sort of thing or reading that sort of thing to make our decisions about what to BS and what may have some legitimacy to it. But even some of the mainstream folks are doing that now. I mean, some of the pundits see this huge lead for the Liberal, and the Conservative newspapers and some of the pundits are trying to take shots at Carney. That's happened from day one, of course, and you expect that, especially taking shots at the frontrunner. Some claiming that Carney may be weak on his China policy. Well, response to that in just a second. Some suggesting that that his climate policies may be somewhat controversial. I've read his book, and if you know his history, there's an element to that as well. But here's the skin. Here's the skinny on this. Okay, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it's not important to voters, not this election. All of those things are important issues, okay? The China policy, the international policy, climate change, which, by the way, notwithstanding party comments on this, the fact that the first thing he did the day he got sworn in was cancel the consumer carbon tax, and we've seen that already have a positive impact on the price of the fuel at the pumps, might pretty much blunt that argument about whether or not he's going to be an eccentric when it comes to climate policy. He has said and continues to say that it's an important policy, but to the pundits that are making those arguments and to the political parties, Mr. Polyev and Mr. Singh, that may jump on that, you're not reading the room properly. This is an election about Canada's future, about Donald Trump and who is best able to handle Trump and the results of the policies that Trump is imposing, not just on Canada, but on the whole world. And it seems to this point, anyway, that voters are developing a pretty clear choice as to who they think is most qualified to do that. The China policy, sure, it's going to be important. But I don't know that too many people are going to go and mark their ballots at the end of this month in this federal election based on what they think might be Carney's climate policy or any other things like this. It's all about Trump. It's all about our economy. It's all about who can stand up for Canada. The elbows up, the we're not for sale. All of these things are all, I think, offshoots of this whole major concern that we have right now about that Canada and its sovereignty and its economy are under attack from Donald Trump. And how we respond and with whom we respond are going to be the key factors in this. And we've seen this happen. I mean, as we do this podcast right now, we are on the eve of the official announcement of Trump's latest round of tariffs. And we know that Canada is going to get hit hard, and it's going to have to be something that we need to deal with. And we just heard just moments ago before we started the podcast here that Carney has suspended his campaign once again to get back to Ottawa and talk with his ministers and develop some policies about how to respond to what Trump is going to be announcing and how Canada has to react to this and what we can do in the way of countermeasures. That's a huge advantage, by the way, that Carney has. He's the prime minister. He's governing right now, so he can do this. He can talk about this, and he can talk with other world leaders and develop these policies, as he did a week or so ago with the first round of Trump announcements. I think is an indicator to the Canadian public that this is a guy who's on the job. He's not just knocking on doors and doing speeches. He's governing at the same time, especially at a very precarious time in our history. So that's a check in Carney's column when you see him responding like this. The other guys, not so much. I mean, especially when you look at what's going to happen here. The reaction to Trump's policies are going to be, I guess, very, very widespread. Because we're told it's going to have an impact on Europe, on UK certainly, and just about every other country that the United States deals with right now. So who is best qualified to do this? Well, you got a guy like Carney, who, because of his past record, not just with the Bank of Canada or with the Bank of England, but also his roles in the UN policies and World Bank, etc., he's met these people. He's been a contributor to the G7 and G20 meetings and UN meetings on this. He can pick up the phone and has picked up the phone and talk to the British Prime Minister, to the leaders of Germany, France, other members of the EU, to the Scandinavian countries. Those connections have already been developed, and that communication is already on there. And that's going to be essential going forward, because Canada, in as much as we're concerned about our sovereignty, and that's a very justifiable cause, we still are going to have to deal with our friends and our allies. Especially considering what's going on in the States these days. And it's going to be extremely important for us to maintain and strengthen those ties, whether it's with NATO, the G20, other organizations. It's essential to have that happen. And of course, you have Mr. Polyev, who in the past has made rumblings about he doesn't even know about the effectiveness of places like that, like NATO and the G20. And that's disturbing. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. These are the times when we have to rely on I think the strength of some of the institutions that we have counted on since Confederation and build on those. It's I guess one of the things that we're looking at here as voters now and as citizens of this country is who is going to be able to do that. Who's going to work within the confines of our Constitution and the development of the partnerships we developed around the world to try to battle what's going on here. This is going to be a monumental task. And I think it's something we really need to be concerned about. And we have to ask ourselves just what's going on. And we also have to ask ourselves about what the other political parties are doing to respond to this. And I go back to my comment of a few minutes ago about being able to understand what the priorities are. And we saw this. I've oftentimes pointed to the U.S. election, the federal election from last fall, as to, I think, a political party. In that case, it was the American Democratic Party that didn't seem to understand and didn't be able to understand just where voters' heads were. And we saw it happen here in Ontario with the provincial election just a few months ago, too. The Ontario Liberals had a relatively new leader with Bonnie Crombie, and there was some speculation that the Liberals were going to, if not form a government, certainly rise to the level of being the opposition in the legislature and really have an impact on this. It fizzled. I mean, they did pick up more seats. Good for them. But they didn't read the room. The mood in this province, just as the mood in the country, was about tariffs, about Trump, and about how Ontario was going to respond. And we had the Liberal leader and their Liberal candidates talking about things like health care and education and potential government corruptions, all important issues. And in any other election, maybe even the most important issues, but not this time. And not this time. This time, it's all about what's happening in Washington and how are we going to do what we need to do to not just survive, but to continue to thrive. Ford seemed to get the message. The others didn't. And on the federal scene, it's even more important that message resonate with the voters and certainly with the message that we're going to get from our political leaders over the next little while. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of extraneous noise and a lot of information coming at us. And I can't say you can just shut it off altogether because it's coming at us from all sides. And there are going to be people who are going to have their own biases, and they're going to be writing and contemplating what's going to be happening and putting their points of view forth. And that's what democracy is all about. But we need to do our homework and listen to what's going on, and at the same time, watch what they're doing. And I know that's a theme that I talk about time and time again, that we have to watch what they're doing and say, okay, the rhetoric is one thing. What have they done? Does it support what they're talking about doing now? Because if somebody has voted against something for the last 10 or 15 years, and then all of a sudden says, oh, I'm going to support that, or I'm going to build more houses, and you look at the record and say, I don't think so. You had an opportunity to do that when you were in government, and you didn't do it. So why now? Why this revelation? That all of a sudden you're going to change your attitude. History matters here. And the personal history of politicians and the voting history of politicians is very important here. And we have to be cognizant of that all the time. And we're looking for leadership. And I've talked about Carney's background, of course, and not just in banking and economics, but in developing relationships with other partners around the world. And I look at what he's done so far with Trump. He didn't kowtow. I mean, he's dealing with Trump in the way I think that needs to be dealt with. And of course, showing respect for the office, if not for the gentleman himself in Washington. And I hesitate to use the term gentleman when I'm talking about Trump. He waited. I mean, Carney's comments were that I'm not going to talk to him until he stops the rhetoric about this 51st state and respects Canada's sovereignty. Well, you heard the comments from Trump after the phone call with Carney a few days ago, and clearly, advantaged Carney because of that. And I thought there was a very telling comment because, of course, the media were pressing Carney about this and what was going to be happening forward. And there's a lot of negative rhetoric that comes out of Trump all the time, of course. And one of the reporters in the scrum asked him, how do you respond to all these things that are coming out of Trump's about policy and about economics and about these huge tariffs and the impact they're going to have? And Carney made a statement which I think really tells you a lot about he as an individual and the way he's approaching this. Carney says, I take notice of Mr. Trump's comments, but I don't take direction from Mr. Trump's comments, which I thought indicated that, look, I'm not going to get pushed around. I'm going to pay attention to what he's saying, certainly, but we're going to make our decisions based on what's best for Canada, not based on what's going to do to kowtow to Donald Trump. And that's very telling. And those are the sorts of things I think that raise people's eyebrows to say, yeah, maybe there's something there. Maybe that's the kind of leadership that we need in situations like this. So we're going to be watching with great interest. As I say, the tariff announcements are going to come out. We're going to have to wait and see how the leaders respond to what's happening here. The polling so far is interesting, to say the least, but at the same time, it's not definitive. The only poll, as politicians will tell you time and time again, the only poll that matters is the poll on Election Day, when we actually mark our ballots. And we've seen this happen time and time again. And when you look at the numbers, and it's a little better in federal politics, people who tell you who they're going to support can have an influence on polls. People who actually get out and vote will have an influence on who actually forms the government. And there's a big difference sometimes. Not everybody who answers a poll is necessarily going to vote. We don't get 100% turnout in Canadian elections. So, I mean, you look at it this way, for every 10 people that you knock on doors and say, are you going to support this party or that party? Of those 10 people whose doors were just knocked on, there's a pretty good chance that 3 out of 4 of them aren't going to vote at all. They may say, oh, yeah, I'm going to support them, but they're not going to vote. It matters to get the vote out and to make sure that support that is being spoken of is actually going to translate into a vote, because that's what it's all about. So there's a lot of work for all the political parties to do between now and the 28th to ensure that they're going to be successful in that endeavor. But in the meantime, it's about the economy. James Carville made that comment during the Bill Clinton election way back when, in the early 90s. It's the economy, stupid. Well, it's the economy here, too. And it's how we respond to Washington. And so far, I think we're getting a pretty clear picture, at least today, as to which way Canadians are leaning towards who is the best individual to fight for Canada in that ongoing battle. We'll see how this develops over the next 3 weeks. That's it for this session of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for being with us. You can catch us on Substack, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, on YouTube and on Blue Sky as well. Always looking forward to your comments. We want you to keep those coming as well. Until next time, a very busy day. We ask you to please stay in touch and please stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.